Hey, it's your old pal RP from ASNA, again with another video. In this video, we're going to take a look at how to avoid orphan IBM jobs with your ASNA Visual RPG Web applications. This is kind of a nefarious problem. We occasionally will have someone call us in tech support and say, I've got a web application that I wrote with AVR and it is generating many IBM jobs. What's going on? Well, Datagate doesn't just automatically, spuriously start firing off jobs. What creates a job on the IBM is when you do a connect to an ASNA Visual RPG database declare DB object. That's the only time. Datagate doesn't just randomly start making jobs. So if ever you notice this kind of issue, something's up with your code, something's up with the application. So in the case of orphan jobs, it's probably not adhering to the best practice of closing all files and closing the database object on every page. Now let's take a look at it. Let's see this thing in action. It's very easy to understand with some very simple code. I am the Shaky user on the IBM on this IBM. So if we look at Shaky's jobs, and I'll do that with work active job, I'm signed in as Shaky. The only Shaky job that I have right now is that 5250 emulator. So we'll come back to this in just a moment. Now let's take a look at the code we're going to use to prove what's going on here. It's a very simple web application, has a very minimal user interface. It's just got a checkbox, a button, and a list box. And then in its code, it doesn't have very much. We declare a database object, we declare a disk file, page load doesn't do anything, and each time we click a button, we come into this routine here, and there's where we connect to the Datagate database, or the IBM in this case. And by the way, up here, that is the IBM machine that I'm connecting to. I'm connecting over our VPN from my home network, and it's a little bit slow, but it'll work for us okay. Now you notice too, an interesting thing here. I want to be able to time how long it takes to connect to that underlying IBM. So in system diagnostics, there lives a pretty interesting object called the stopwatch class. I'm instancing that each time we click a button. So each time it's a new page, it's a new instance of the stopwatch class. The start method starts it, the stop method stops it, and then it's got a property of elapsed milliseconds. So I'm logging how long each database connection took down here to a list box. Then we do an open the file, read a record, and then if the disconnect checkbox is checked, then we close all files and do a disconnect DB, disconnect the database object. Now, you might wonder why I'm doing close all instead of just close input file. Well, the best practice is that every ASP.NET web page should always close all files and then disconnect its database object. So by getting into the habit of just saying close star all, you know you're not going to miss any files to close. Just sort of a muscle memory thing, just sort of a best practice. So that's the code. So let's take a look at it in action here. Let's make sure I don't have a dangling instance of IIS that would mess me up. Don't think I do. Again, I'm on my home VPN, so a little shaky, but not awful. But it's definitely slower than most would be. So now I'm going to click connect. I expect it to take about 3.5, 4 seconds, somewhere in there. Took 3.7 seconds to do that connect. That's a lot. Press F5, and there's the job that it created for us. Now, we're using connection pooling with this database name. And we'll come back and look at that in just a moment. Let me make a note so I don't forget that. We're using connection pooling. That means that when we did that disconnect, because we did execute that code, because we do have that checkbox checked, when we did execute that code, when it disconnected the database, Datagate said, oh, you got connection pooling turned on, so I'm not going to dispatch that job completely. I'm going to hold on to him for you because you're telling me you want him back with connection pooling. Now what that means then is this job's sitting there with 14 is open files, is no open files, and it's using very little, if any, resources. So it's just marginally there, but Datagate knows it's there. Watch how much quicker we get subsequent jobs. 12 milliseconds, 1 millisecond, 2 milliseconds, 2. Now it's important to remember that this pool job is for anybody who connects with the shaky user profile. So typically a web application has one user profile that many users connect with, so many users would have this job available. And if 2 users should hit the connect line of code at exactly the same instance, Datagate's smart enough then to spin up another job, and then you'd have another job out there in a connection pool. Now, the rule of thumb is you should be able to sit down and run your web application by yourself, get everybody else off the system, and only see one job. If you ever see more than one, you got bad trouble. Now let's take a look at that. So let's end things. I'm going to terminate everything. And now we're going to run it again. And we get our work active job up there, and I think we'll see that it's empty. There's nothing there. Now I'm going to turn the disconnect off. Now what I'll do is connect the first time. It'll take the same 3.5, 4 seconds. And we'll come over here and we'll see it. But now watch what happens. I've got disconnect not checked. That means that I'm not going to execute these 2 lines of code. I'm going to open, do something with the file, read it in this case, and then just go on about my business. So I'll now connect again. It'll take it 3.5, 4 seconds. There it took 4 seconds. Now watch this. Now I've got 2 jobs on the IBM I. Now I've got 3 jobs on the IBM I. Look there. Now what's happening? What's happening is, because we didn't close all files and disconnect, Datagate didn't get the signal to put this job in its connection pool. So what we basically created here are 3 orphan jobs that we'll never get back. And if the user, or if 10 users were hitting this page pretty hot and heavy, they would start firing off lots of jobs. Now from a performance point of view, these jobs have a resource tied up because each one of them has a file open, or whatever files were opened in that page. So they're not really doing a lot of damage, except they got those files open. The real damage they're doing to your web application is they're causing it to have to spin up a new job every time it connects, and you will feel that performance. Now, the nefarious part about this issue is as you roll the web application out and just have a few users, you won't notice it as much. And then if you're adding users sort of slowly to the application, it'll kind of start inching its way into your life and you'll start noticing it. And then if you add a whole bunch of users, you'll start noticing it real bad. So this is critical to manage this appropriately. And the short story is this: you must do a close all and a disconnect on every stinking page in your web application. If you're not, you got job leaks somewhere along the line. Now, if you do, how do you find them? It's really hard to find them. We've got some resources. If you go to ASNA.com and click Support Overview, I clicked Support Overview. Right here on that page, at Support Overview, is a link to a little index of articles. And it's just 4 articles that talk about several topics you should understand if you're doing all this with an AVR web application. And the second one here, How to Avoid Orphan Jobs, kind of explains the process of how you try to figure out what's going on with your web application. The short story is this. I mentioned it a little bit ago. The short story is, let's press F5 there. The short story is, let's go ahead and end this. And then let's go back to here and press F5. And then let's run it one more time. And the short story is that as if we use it like we should, where we're disconnecting every time. There we go, 3.5. Now, I'll click connect again. And you'll notice that as I click connect and I'm connecting and then disconnecting, but it's only one job. It's reusing that job. The short story is, if you're lucky enough to be able to get everybody off the web application, make sure there's no dangling jobs, make sure all the IBM I jobs are going, then as a single user, start using that web application. If you ever see, and keep pressing F5 on work user job with that user. If at any point you see that more than one job there in that work active job or that work user job list, something's wrong. You got a leak, and then you got to go find it. What page were you on? Where are you not closing all and disconnecting? Another article that's out there is, another way to kind of get this, a sneaky way, is if you've built your application with lots of secondary classes, you need to understand the singleton DB pattern. So I recommend you take a look at all these articles. Now, I did say I was going to get back to connection pooling, and let me show you what I mean by that, just to make sure we're on the same page. If I take a look at my Datagate Explorer, and if I take a look at my database name here, just very briefly, that's the database name we were using. And you'll notice that he's got connection pooling checked, and he's got a 20-minute idle. Now, what that means is, in the database name, connection pooling checked, and a time. The default is 20 minutes. What that 20 minutes is, is significant because I'm pressing F5 and that job is still there. Now, Datagate doesn't know if that user's ever coming back or not. And in fact, a couple of those articles that I just referenced explain this. Over the course of a day, if you've got 100 users, you might grow to 10 or 15, or maybe, I suppose, in the wildest dreams, let's say 20 jobs on the IBM I, serving lots of users, hundreds of users. Well, when do those jobs go away? They start dropping out of the basket when that session timeout expires. So, and each job has its own number. Each job knows how many elapsed seconds it's got left. So once that thing sits there, if we had the patience to sit here for 20 minutes and keep pressing F5 with no activity, after 20 minutes, it would drop out of the basket. It would go away. So database connection pooling is very powerful, but you must use it correctly. And it kind of goes against your intuition in that it seems bad for performance to do a close all and a disconnect, because we all know that generating an IBM I job is resource intensive, takes a few seconds or takes some time. And here we are writing code that says disconnect that. The swindle here is with Datagate's connection pooling, that disconnect doesn't really disconnect the job. It tells Datagate, put that job in the job pool for me if you've got one. So there you go. Database management is critical in an ASP.NET web application, and it can lead to orphan jobs that, at least from a job spin-up point of view, can cause big problems for performance in your AVR web application. This doesn't apply generally to fat Windows clients. If you've got a fat Windows client, you can be a little more sloppy with it, because just as soon as that exe ends, those job ends. Now, you can, with sloppiness in a Windows application, fire up a bunch of jobs too. So I wouldn't say that it unconditionally doesn't apply to a Windows application. It's just generally not as bad for a Windows application. So there you go. Pay very close attention to your database connections, because they can really chew you up. They can work for you and do a great job if you treat them right. So one last time on our way out, where's that article? Go to ASNA homepage, up there at the top, click Support, Overview, and under Product Specific Help, there are AVR, ASPX, Web Application Connection, and Performance articles. And those are all good reading on this subject. All right. Thanks for watching. We appreciate it.